guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I realised that on my channel I've only ever done hauls, wrap-ups and one reading vlog. I've never actually done a sit-down video purely on recommendations. Seeing as my favourite genre of all time is mystery thrillers, I thought I would talk you through some of my all-time favourite mystery thrillers, and hopefully you will find at least one recommendation in this video that you've not heard of before. I know I do read quite a lot of popular books anyway, but yeah, fingers crossed some of these books are new to you, or even just older ones that you might have overlooked or something like that. I thought this was a good time to do this video because we are just about hitting autumn in the UK. It's jumper season, I've got on some darker lipstick, some red nails, and I'm just feeling very autumnal. So this is the time of year that I love to read mystery thrillers because it's like near Halloween, it's cozy, it's just that season where reading is like the best thing ever. So yes, without further ado, let me go on to raving about some of the books. So I've tried to structure this video in some kind of way. So the first thing that I'm going to do is talk about a couple of my favourite authors in general in the mystery thriller genre. And the first one that I wanted to talk about was Dennis Lehane. I've only read two of his books, but they were both instant 5 stars. I've got one of them here, and this one is Shutter Island and the other one is Mystic River. These books are both amazing. A lot of you might have already seen the film. It is very popular. It's got Leonardo DiCaprio in it. Mystic River is also a film as well, so again you might have already seen that. So in Shutter Island we're following this US Marshal called Teddy, and he's gone over to Shutter Island, which is the home of this mental asylum, and one of their patients has escaped and she's a convicted killer. So they've tasked him to go and look for her. This huge hurricane hits and then he basically gets stuck in this mental asylum on this island, and things start seeming to be not as they first appeared. The more things he finds out, the more things start to get more confusing. Things just aren't adding up, and this book was intense. I read through this so quickly. You are hooked straight away. The plot twists in this book are insane. It honestly blew my mind to find out like what was really happening with this book. And with Mystic River, I'll have to put the picture on the screen because I read this book on my Kindle. Mystic River, we're following these 3 men in this small town. We start the book off when they're all children. Something really horrible happens to one of the boys, and then we are following them. I think it's roughly 20 to 30 years in the future. They're all still in this small town. One of the boys is a police officer, one of the boys is an ex-criminal and now family man, and then the third man has turned out to be a little bit strange. He has never quite got over the effects of what happened to him as a child. So this book starts with a murder. The ex-criminal turned family man, his daughter is found murdered. His old friend, the police officer, is investigating this crime. And then the third man, who everyone thinks is a little bit strange, seems like the most likely suspect. This book was amazing. I could not put this book down. As soon as I put it down, I had to pick it straight back up again because I just needed to find out what was happening. This book was such an emotional read as well. I'm pretty sure I cried. It's very tense, thrilling, and I just loved everything about this book. They are the only 2 books I have read by Dennis Lehane. I would definitely be open to reading some more of his thriller books because, as I said, these were both 5 star. They were spectacular. The next author who has become a little bit of a go-to read for me is Lisa Jewell, and I have read at this point 4 books by her. I have 2 of them here. Actually I have 3, but I'm not going to recommend the 3rd book. So my favourite ones are Then She Was Gone, Invisible Girl and The Night She Disappeared, which I read on audiobook very recently. The other book I've read by Lisa Jewell is The Family Upstairs. I didn't really like that book. I will link my review of it in the description box if you're interested. I know some people did like that book, but I just really didn't, so. First I will talk about Invisible Girl because this is probably like my least favourite of my top 3. This book follows 3 different characters who are loosely connected. As the story goes on, we see them merge together and it's all focused around this young girl's disappearance. I feel like Lisa Jewell has a real way of writing characters that you really care about. They feel very real, and I was very interested in finding out where this story went and seeing how all the characters' lives would connect together. There wasn't much that I didn't like about this book. I think the only thing was I didn't connect with the characters quite as much as with the other 2 books. The first one being Then She Was Gone, which was my first read by Lisa Jewell. So 10 years in the past, our main character Laurel's daughter went missing, and Laurel has never found out what happened to her. She's never had any closure. In the present day, she meets this man who she's very charmed by, And when she meets his daughter, who is 9 years old, she's taken aback by how similar she is to her own daughter, and it kind of goes from there. Although some aspects of the book I did find slightly predictable, the characters in this book are so well thought out. I cared about all of these characters. This book really stuck with me for how it made me feel and how emotional it was, so I highly recommend that one too. And then the most recent one that I read was The Night She Disappeared. This book is about, again, a similar kind of story. We're following this character whose daughter went missing a few years ago with her boyfriend. A lot of people believe that they just ran away together, but our main character knows that that would never happen, and she's determined to find out what happened to her daughter. This book was a 5-star for me. I loved the twists, I loved the characters, the whole story and how everything came together was just perfect. Highly recommend that one. I loved that book. Lisa Jewell is definitely a very good author to read if you like more emotional mystery thrillers. They're not as like fast-paced thrillery as other books that I've read, but the characters in these books are so well done that I feel like they stick with me a lot more because I really care about the story and I really actually care about what happens to these characters. I find that a lot of the time with thrillers, if I don't care about the characters, I don't really care about the story in general, whereas with Lisa Jewell's books, I almost always do. Next up, I thought I would talk about my queen, Karen Slaughter. You're probably fed up of me talking about Karen Slaughter. I probably mention her in every single video if you've watched any of my videos before. However, I just love her, and I got a message recently on Instagram that said that they thought Karen Slaughter was really like underhyped on YouTube and Bookstagram, and I thought she was really overhyped. So I thought I would talk about her because if you've never heard of her or never read any of her books before, you need to. The two standalones that I have here are probably among my favourites. I'm going to talk about her again a little bit later on, but it'll make more sense then. So the first one is The Good Daughter, and she often writes about these sibling relationships in her standalones. So we're following two estranged siblings. When they were children, they had this really horrifying attack on their home, which left their mother dead, and both of them scarred forever. In the present day, one of the sisters who stayed in that hometown experiences another very violent attack, and the two sisters come together to work on this legal case to do with the attack, and then the past comes back to haunt them, as pasts often do in these books. This book made me cry within the first, I don't know, 30 pages. There's so much violence in this book. It is so dark and it is so disturbing. I love her for that, but it definitely comes with a warning. There are two scenes in this book that are absolutely horrifying. Like I said, one of them made me cry because of how just emotional and how visceral and gut-wrenching it was. Because you care about these characters, everything that happens to them you just care about so deeply. I had to put it down. I had to just like take a minute to regather myself because it was just so awful. So this one is not for the faint of heart. If you're new to thrillers, I definitely wouldn't start with this one. But again, Karen Slaughter is another one of those authors whose characters are really good. She makes you care about the characters. I love a good sister relationship in a book, and yes, this one definitely ticks all those boxes. And then my favourite book of all time probably is Pretty Girls. This is another standalone. Again, we're following two sisters. I read this book a really long time ago. It's probably about 7-8 years ago now. This was an easy 5-star. This book made me cry. It's just one of those books I always remember because it changed the game for me with thrillers. It's so dark, it's so violent, there's a lot of violence towards women. If you don't really like reading about that, I would steer clear of this because this is a very intense book. I think I'm going to reread this again soon because I've forgotten half of the plot. So we're following these two sisters who again don't really speak very much. One of the sisters' husbands dies very early on in the book, and the two sisters are both haunted by the disappearance of their other sister 20 years before. So they come together and try and piece together why all these things are happening to them, and they come across a lot more than they bargained for. This book was spectacular. I remember reading it at uni and all my friends were about to go out or something like that, and I was like, I'm not coming, I need to finish this book. And I sat in my room by myself and was just like crying, sobbing, in love with this. So if you have already read like quite a few mystery thrillers and you're looking for something quite dark, then this is 100% my recommendation. I love this book forever. Now, I know this one might be a little bit predictable. However, if you're kind of new to mystery thrillers, this is someone whose books I would recommend wholeheartedly. And it is Gillian Flynn. I read these books when I first started getting into mystery thrillers and I was absolutely obsessed with her. I have 2 of the 3 that I've read here. I've got Dark Places and I have Gone Girl. Now, I know you've probably like, what the hell, this is nothing new. Basically, if you've read Gone Girl and only Gone Girl, this is me telling you to read Dark Places and Sharp Objects. And if you are lucky enough to have never seen Gone Girl the film, read the book, or been spoiled, then definitely read this book. This was probably one of the first mystery thrillers that I ever read, and this blew my mind. It changed my life. I've never been so blown away by a thriller in my life. We're basically looking at the marriage of Nick and Amy Dunn. Amy goes missing and Nick quickly becomes the prime suspect, but things start looking a bit strange. He feels like he might be being set up, and the whole feel of this book is just amazing. I love how they talk about how the police and the media interact with him in this book, and the stakes just seem so high, and yeah, I freaking love this book. After I read that, I read Dark Places, which actually might be my favourite. So this book, we're following this girl called Libby. When she was a kid, her and her family lived in this farmhouse, and basically all of her family were killed except for her because she was hiding in a closet, and her brother, who was 15 at the time, was put behind bars for it. So Libby in the present day, I think it's like 20 years later, is starting to be a bit skeptical as to whether it was actually her brother that did this. Her testimony helped put her brother behind bars, and she's starting to have possible regrets, and she basically delves back into it to try and figure out what really happened. And this book had so many twists and turns. It was so dark, it was amazing. I loved every second of it. This has very like culty vibes, it's very creepy, and yeah, I didn't predict the ending whatsoever. And then Sharp Objects. Sharp Objects is a little more uncomfortable for me because it does talk a lot about self-harm and depression, which is obviously very dark if you're not in the right headspace for it. But we're following, I think she was a journalist, and she revisits her hometown because there's been a series of murders of young girls and she is going to be covering the case. Again, this was another book where I didn't predict the ending whatsoever. It was very suspenseful, very dark again, very interesting. Sorry if you're like, that was so obvious and unnecessary, but there's bound to be someone out there that hasn't read Gillian Flynn, right? And the last author I want to, I don't know, shine a spotlight on is a recent favourite of mine, and it is Alice Feeney. I've read 2 books by her so far this year and I loved them. The first one being His and Hers, and the second one being Rock, Paper, Scissors. So this book we're following alternate chapters of an ex-husband and wife, and I think he's called Jack and she's called Anna. He is a police detective in this small town and she is a BBC presenter, and she has come to this small town to cover the case that Jack is investigating. Basically, they found this woman who was murdered. Things just get more dark and serious from there. Basically, there's a pattern here. If a book is very dark, happens in a small town, has some like marriage issues, I'm bound to love it. But that has all of this in here. Jack, the detective who's looking into this case, starts looking a little bit suspicious to everyone else, whereas Jack is looking at this and thinking that his ex-wife Anna is possibly responsible for this. So you don't really know who to trust. There are so many plot twists at the end of this book. I did not predict what was going to happen, and it also was actually kind of scary. There were some scenes towards the end that were very creepy, quite scary. I didn't really like reading this in the dark because it was like creeping me out a bit. So yeah, highly recommend this book. And then I recently just read Rock, Paper, Scissors. I've seen this all over on Instagram. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5. In this book, we're following this husband and wife, Adam and Amelia. They've gone on a trip to the Scottish Highlands because they're kind of trying to fix their marriage, and they think that this weekend away that they've won will potentially solve their issues. But when they get there, things start being very creepy. They're staying in this old chapel, which is in the middle of nowhere. It's basically almost abandoned. There's tensions between the couple themselves. They're hiding secrets from each other. The twist in this book was amazing. I didn't see that coming. I read it and I was like, hang on a sec. And I had to go back and just make sure I was right. It was very, very well done. It all kind of made sense, but it still surprised me a lot. Just the atmosphere of this book, it was so tense and very fast paced. A lot of the chapters end on a note where you kind of have to read on. It was very hard to put down. So I would highly recommend both of these 2 books, and I think I'm going to read Sometimes I Lie next by her, which is I think before these books. So yes, hopefully that one will be just as amazing. Next up, I wanted to do a little shout out to two of my favourite YA thriller books. Sometimes I really do get in the mood to read some YA thrillers because they're a lot more fun. I like reading about female friendships and like toxic friends. There's just something about that kind of book that I love. So the first book I want to talk about is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So this book was written by Holly Jackson and it's now a series. I haven't read the other books in the series, but I'm definitely going to. This book was so good and it totally took me by surprise. We're following this girl called Pip who is in school. She's decided to do her school project on a local case that happened in her town a few years ago. This girl went missing and she was later found dead, and then her boyfriend was found to have committed suicide, and they just kind of put the two together. The boyfriend was assumed to have killed the girlfriend and then killed himself, and it was just sort of put to bed and that was it. However, she doesn't think that that is the case. She decides to start asking people about this and she stirs up a lot of old secrets. Pip in this book is one of my favourite characters that I've ever read from. She's just so smart and resourceful and clever and totally knows who she is even though she's a teenage girl. She was just very inspiring, I think, and I think a lot of people will really like Pip. It was written in a really cool way where we see interview transcripts, emails, her research notes, so it was told in a really fun way. I didn't predict the ending again, and Pip is just like the sweetest character ever. Like, it's hard not to root for her. With it being a YA, it is not very dark. It does have some dark elements to it, but it had enough in it to satisfy me, who loves the very dark and disturbing side of crime fiction. And then the second book that I want to talk about is Dangerous Girls by Abigail Hass. Now this book blew me away. I read it this year in the summer. I was really in the mood to read some like Pretty Little Liars style books that gave me all of the fun YA toxic vibes that I wanted. Dangerous Girls gave me all that and so much more. So we're following this group of friends, but our main character, can't remember her name, is on this trip. She's there with her boyfriend, her best friend, and a couple of their other close friends as well. And it's meant to be like their last trip before they all go on their separate journeys in life after their senior year. However, our main character's best friend is found murdered in the apartment, and people start getting quite suspicious of our main character. I'm gonna call her Anna. I think she might be called Anna. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. So I loved how this book dealt with the whole suspicion. It kind of reminded me of Gone Girl in the sense that the media and the police are all sort of twisting Anna's words, making her out to be the bad guy, and it's very frustrating to read. The whole book made me angry because of how she was being treated. It's just like a very stressful read. I was rooting for our main character so badly. I also love the way this book is told because we're getting lots of different flashbacks. So we're following the holiday, we're following bits from when they all met each other at school and what happened like just before the holiday. We're following our main character in the present day as she is about to be put to trial for this crime, and it was just spectacular. The plot twist in this book, oh my god, it threw me completely. I was actually fuming about this book and I loved that. As soon as my boyfriend came home, I was like, listen to what happened in this book. It's insane. I'm so angry about this. But like, I loved it in every way possible, and it is definitely one of my favourite books I've read this year. Next up, I want to talk about a couple of series, like crime thrillery series that I love. The first one I'm going to show you is this series by Katarina Diamond. I don't think it really has a name, but we are following the same detectives in these books. The first book is called The Teacher. She sort of reminds me of Karen Slaughter in the way that she writes very dark, disturbing books. Definitely be aware of that before you go into them. I remember the first book being very, very gory and graphic in terms of the violence that goes on in there. We're following these two detectives who work together in the south of England. We're just following a different crime in every book. I really love the detectives. I love their friendship together and I love how that grows throughout the series. They're so fast-paced because you're often getting alternate chapters between the detectives and then a couple of other random people that we're not sure why they're involved in the book yet. At the end of every chapter, there's often some sort of little plot twist or some reveal or something that just makes you need to keep reading. They're so easy to binge. So if you like crime detective novels, that is definitely one that I would recommend. And then the second series I want to recommend, can anybody guess? I'll give you a second to guess. Okay, it's the Grant County series by Karen Slaughter. Sorry, not sorry. This series is amazing. There's 6 books in this series. We're following a detective called Jeffrey and his ex-wife Sarah. She's a doctor, but she's also the coroner for the town, and it's set in Atlanta, Georgia. Oh, and we're also following this detective called Lehane, who is Jeffrey's like partner. And again, it's a similar thing. In every book we're following a different crime that the detectives are investigating, but there is a lot more like continuity with these books. Oh my god, it was just the best book series I've ever read. I was so invested in these books. They are so dark, they are so gory, they're gritty, they are messed up, they are fast-paced, twisty, everything that I could ever dream of in a book. And the end of this series made me bawl my eyes out. It was absolutely heartbreaking. I've never felt so like emotionally invested in a series, or even just like a book in general, I think, that I have with that series. I know a lot of other people are reading the Will Trent series, which is sort of the sequel series. There are currently 10 books in that series. I've read 5. I don't like it as much as the Grant County series, however that's just because of my preference for the characters in the Grant County series. There's nothing wrong with the Will Trent series, it's just like a personal preference thing. Grant County series has my heart forever, and I'm going to reread them someday because they were just amazing. And then the last books that I want to talk about are just a couple of random standalones where either I've not read any other books by the author, or that might be their debut or something like that. So the first book I want to talk about is Playing Nice by J.P. Delaney. This author does have quite a lot of thrillers out, but I've heard some very mixed reviews about these books. However, this one is kind of widely recognised as perhaps his best, and I probably won't be reading any more of his books unless any new ones come out that have better reviews. So this book is about this couple called Maddie and Pete. They have a son called Theo who's 2 years old. Then one day this other couple knock at the door and tell them the news that their babies were switched at birth, and Theo isn't really their child, it's theirs, and they actually have their child, if that makes sense. This book is very, very stressful. It's very emotional, it feels very real. It talks a lot about the legal issues behind child custody and child protection, and the logistics of what actually happens if children are switched at birth and the legal implications. As you might expect, the two families at first play nice with each other, and then things start to go wrong very quickly. The stakes feel so high in this book because you get really invested in these characters, and the thought of them having to lose their child to this other family is just devastating. So the whole concept of this book is very compelling in itself. It draws you in very quickly and you really do care about what happens with these characters. I thought it all wrapped up very nicely, and yes, I would recommend this one if you're after more of like a legal, domestic-y kind of thriller. The next one I want to recommend, I listened to an audiobook, and that one was Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica. So this book follows a couple of different perspectives, but ultimately the story is about this woman called Shelby who goes missing. A few weeks later, a mother and daughter duo go missing, and now I think it's like 11 years in the future, the daughter returns, and this just like blows up this little community. We're following a couple of different perspectives in the past and the present, and then the end of the book like ties them all together. This book was so good. The first 2 parts of this book are probably the best opening chapters to a thriller I've ever read. I physically could not like stop listening to this book. I was just hooked straight away, and I had to know what was happening with these characters. It was just a very well crafted thriller that kept me interested the whole time, and I just loved everything about it. However, saying I loved everything about it, there was one thing I didn't. I would have given this a 5-star, but towards the end there was just one character that I just wanted to shake because I thought she was being a bit stupid, and that kind of annoys me in books because it sort of ruined the cleverness of everything for me a tiny bit. Like, why was this character acting like that? I don't know. But honestly, that is like the tiniest criticism about this book. I would still highly recommend that book. Next up, I wanted to recommend I Let You Go by Claire Mackintosh. Now, it's been a very, very long time since I've read this book, but I'm pretty sure we're following this woman called Jenna, and there's been a really tragic accident at the start of this book which results in the death of this little boy called Jacob, and Jenna is really struggling to deal with this. She basically goes off on a little journey by herself to move on from this accident. That's all I really remember about the plot, but I remember the twist in this book blew me away. I won't say anything else about the twist at all, except that it is like one of my favourite twists I've ever read. It also deals with a lot of dark subjects. I'm pretty sure there was domestic abuse in there, which was pretty hard hitting. So it's not an easy book to get through, but my overall feeling of this book when I first read it was like 5-star, loved it. The next book I have is The Memory Wood by Sam Lloyd. And this book really surprised me. We're following a couple of different perspectives. One, this boy called Elijah who lives in the Memory Wood. The second is this girl called Alyssa who is kidnapped and taken to this memory wood as well. And we're also following a detective who's trying to find Alyssa in like real time. Elijah's been in this memory wood for a long time. His life basically is the memory wood. He can't remember being anywhere else. So Alyssa is trying to get him to help her escape, but he doesn't really want her to escape because he's found a new friend. It feels very much like a cat and mouse kind of thing. It is super fast paced, very like action packed. I remember reading the second half of this book in one sitting, just in bed one day because I couldn't stop reading. The twist in this book was really, really well done. This is one of those books where you just can't put it down. It is very like compulsive. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 purely because of how totally engrossed in it I was. So yeah, definitely recommend that one. And then the last book that I have to recommend to you I read this year, and it is probably still my favourite book that I've read this year, and that is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. Now this book has recently been more popular because there was a Netflix show that came out. I never watched that show because I literally read it like the week before it came out. This book is fabulous. There's definitely mixed reviews about it, but this one like blew my mind. I never knew that this book is what I needed in a thriller. So even though this was my favourite book of the year, I can't remember the main character's name. What's her name? I can't remember. We'll just call her main character. So she goes on a night out. She meets this guy called David and she hits it off with him instantly. They have a kiss. He runs off. She suspects maybe he's like married or something because of how like strange he was, but she like can't stop thinking about him. And then she goes into work and he's her new boss. So that's awkward. But then this guy's wife comes in and she's like, oh God, like he was married after all. But our main character bumps into his wife later on and they become like secret friends behind David's back. So our main character starts sort of juggling this weird secret that she's got, that she kissed David, and this secret friendship with his wife, who's called Adele, by the way. I don't know if I said that. This book had the weirdest ending, but it was like the best ending ever. You cannot predict this ending. You cannot, because it is so mind-boggling and completely out of left field, but completely made sense. This book was so different to me because it creeped me out to my core. The whole concept of the like explanation as to what is going on creeps me out so bad. But it is definitely a weird one. So although I thought it was like a 5 out of 5, you might be like, what the bloody hell has she told me to read? But have faith, people. Have faith that this book will completely blow you away. And I hope it does if you haven't read it before. If you have read it, let me know what you thought, because I have seen a few reviews that gave it like 1 star because of the ending. I gave it 5 star because of the ending. So yeah, I'll be very interested to see what you have to say. And with that, that is all of the thrillers that I have to recommend to you today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really hope that you've managed to find at least one book in this video that's piqued your interest. Please let me know if you've read any of these books before. Let me know what you thought. I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like, and if you want to subscribe, that would mean the absolute world to me. And yeah, I will see you in my next video. Bye!